One of the more controversial debates when it comes to the lore of Tears of the Kingdom is whether or not Sonia and Rauru had a child. For the royal lineage to carry on, this must have been the case, right? Sonia herself states during one of the memories,
"Additionally, I sense that we share a blood connection."
So in order for this to be possible, many would argue that her and Rauru must have had a child, one that would be half Hylian and half Zonai. This child would have had the Zonai's godlike powers, bearing Sonia's proclivity for time power and Rauru's proclivity for light power. But here's the thing, such a child does not exist. The idea that Zelda is literally a descendant of the original king and queen of Hyrule is simply not true. And the reason is because of the Goddess Hylia. There has already been established lore to justify my theory, and it's recent enough to justify why Sonia and Rauru passed away without a natural-born child to overtake the throne. So let's discuss the reasons why Sonia and Rauru weren't hiding a secret child during the memories of Tears of the Kingdom. But before we do, I hope that you'll consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already, so that you'll know when I post more Zelda and Nintendo content in the future. I hope you enjoy this video enough to earn your subscription. And of course, there are spoilers for the story and memories of Tears of the Kingdom, as well as another game in the series which we'll get to later in the video. Let's get into it. There are two scenes during the game that have led a large portion of the Zelda fanbase to believe that Rauru and Sonia had a child. During the beginning sequence of the game, Zelda and Link stumble upon these ancient murals beneath Hyrule Castle while investigating the source of the gloom that had begun appearing across Hyrule. As Zelda scans the murals deciphering their meaning, she recounts to Link that,
"It is said that my ancestors, the first of Hyrule's royal family, were born from a union with gods who had descended from the heavens."
The other scene is the portion of Memory 4 I showed during the introduction, where Sonia tells Zelda that they
share a blood connection.
These two things together do certainly imply that Zelda is the great
2 hours later.
granddaughter of Sonia and Rauru. But here's my issue with this. If such a child were to exist, I think the game would have needed to allude to the child at some point, whether it be via dialogue from one of the characters or environmental hints. However, there are no such clues. In previous titles, we would assume Zelda would carry on the lineage of the royal family because at the end of each Zelda game, Zelda would be, alive. But now, the only royal woman of the Hyrulean kingdom dies during the story. In fact, both Sonia and Rauru die during the memories. So the child would have needed to have been born prior to Zelda arriving in the ancient past. Would it have made sense to see this child during the memories? At no point is a child mentioned. In Memories 3 and 4, Rauru and Sonia are shown to be out for a walk. Supposedly, they did so without their child. In Memory 7, we see the throne room and there's not another seat for a prince or princess. In Memory 8, they are again out and about without their child. Now, you could argue that their child was under someone else's care while they were preoccupied with Zelda, and that would make some sense, but it's still odd that if they did have a child, that the child simply wouldn't have been around. Aside from the fact that this is the king and queen's child, this half Hylian, half Zonai person likely would have had a great deal of power and been an anomaly amongst their people. You would think that such a prominent figure would have made an appearance during several of the key moments in the war with the Gerudo. They don't appear in Memory 6 or 13 where we see the soldiers. You would also assume this child would have appeared with the sages at the Forgotten Temple when it was time to pass out the secret stones and confront Ganondorf, if the child was able-bodied and able to fight. I think there were plenty of moments within the memories where it would have made sense for the child to be present, yet there wasn't one. Now, the child could have simply been too young, but we have no idea what age this alleged child would be. Another peculiar detail that supports my theory is that the royal crest of the Hyrulean kingdom changes after Sonia and Rauru perish. The royal crest of the Hyrulean kingdom when Sonia and Rauru were in charge is this crest, with wings, a bright bloom, and the mind's eyes. And as we know, eventually the crest of the Hyrulean kingdom goes back to the traditional crest as we understand it from previous Zelda titles. If it truly was Sonia and Rauru's child who took over the kingdom after they passed, then you would think that their child would have kept the Hyrulean crest that they set for the kingdom. But instead, we end up with a Hyrulean crest devoid of any reference to the Zonai. Now, a lot of my discussion up to this point has been more so conjecture rather than fact-finding, so I can understand if you don't view this as compelling evidence. However, if you were to take anything from my theory here, it's what I'm about to talk about next. Let's get into the main reason why I don't believe Rauru and Sonia had a child together. Skyward Sword introduces a ton of lore that is meant to explain many of the things about the Legend of Zelda series that us fans have been theorizing about for 25 years. One of those lore bombs comes to us from the new villain, Demise, who is responsible for the cyclical nature of the battle between power, wisdom, and courage. In the final battle after he is defeated, he issues the famous curse that bounds the spirit of the hero and the blood of the goddess to the hatred incarnate. This vicious cycle of evil having to be overcome by the forces of good is reimagined in the lore we received in Breath of the Wild. Calamity Ganon, who reappears every 10,000 years, is met by the blood of the goddess and the spirit of the hero. Of course, Link is the one who carries the spirit of the hero within him. The ancient hero of the tapestry also carries the spirit of the hero, and while we've assumed this was Link, he may not have actually been named Link. After all, he's not even Hylian. But what of the blood of the goddess? This refers to the Goddess Hylia giving up her divinity prior to the events of Skyward Sword in order to reincarnate herself as a mortal. This mortal is Zelda, and she did this because the Triforce could only be used as the mortal. Zelda, who spoke directly to Goddess Hylia and learned of her and Link's destiny, explains this to Spoomples once he finally catches up to Zelda in the Sealed Temple. Let's talk about Skyward Sword for a moment. I received many comments dismissing Skyward Sword's lore because Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom might exist in its own continuity and should be viewed on their own, without the influence of the previous titles. The problem with that is that we actually do have a direct tie to Skyward Sword in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In both games, the Master Sword makes this sound.
Sword.
This is the sound of Fi, the companion character from Skyward Sword. Zelda can understand this sound as if it were a voice speaking to her. She can understand this voice because Zelda has the blood of the goddess Hylia within her, and Fi is a servant of Hylia. At the end of Skyward Sword, Fi resigns herself to rest within the Master Sword, accompanying Link for eternity. This is still true by the time Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom occur, as it is directly referenced. So the lore of Skyward Sword is still relevant and drawn upon when understanding the world of Tears of the Kingdom. The reason the child theory is so prominent is because the terms ancestor, relative, and blood are used to describe the goddess's relationship with the Princess of Hyrule, as opposed to the term spirit, which is applied to the hero. A spirit is understood to be able to jump from person to person as needed. Although traditionally we understand the hero as the chosen knight from a royal clan, this is why we don't question the ancient hero who appears to be Zonai, or at a minimum, not Hylian. With the princess, we are to believe that this is a pure family bloodline that runs through the royals of Hyrule. But what if we challenge that idea? Depending on your interpretation of the timeline, it's a tall order to assume that Zelda from Skyward Sword is the great-grandmother of every Zelda and every royal through Tears of the Kingdom. If we take Fujibayashi's suggestion that there was some mass destruction event that led to Rauru's refounding of the Hyrulean Kingdom, Sonia being literally related to Zelda from Skyward Sword seems a bit far-fetched. The time-honored tradition of naming the royal female Zelda has been lost by the time Sonia enters the picture, so that to me is evidence of the Royal Kingdom's fate from the original timeline. Let's look at one of those quotes a little more closely. During the opening sequence of the game, while Zelda is looking over the murals, she says,
"Were born from a union with gods who had descended from the heavens."
We can safely assume that, given that the mural depicts Sonia and Rauru locking hands, that this union is referring to the marriage, or union, of the founding king and queen. But what if there's a deeper meaning to this? Recall that I mentioned during Skyward Sword, Zelda turns out to be the mortal incarnate of the goddess Hylia. Hylia enlightens Zelda of her master plan, and Zelda then has to carry it out. Wouldn't this too be considered a union with a god? As for Tears of the Kingdom, the gods are obviously a reference to the Zonai. But these are legends after all. And with the passage of time, from Skyward Sword at the beginning of the timeline, to Tears of the Kingdom all the way at the end, it's plausible that the story changed. The fact that each story in itself is a legend, and can vary from game to game, certainly muddies the water, but opens the door for expanded interpretation. It gives the Zelda developers the liberty to change bits of the history if it's necessary to tell the story in the current game, much to the chagrin of the fans. If it indeed was intended that Sonia and Rauru had a child that carried on their lineage, then the one places would have had to have been mentioned would have been the Chamberlain's stories, which Link returns to the surface during the mission Messages of an Ancient Era. These 12 accounts are stories that were recorded by a Chamberlain who was clearly very fond of the royal family and likely accompanied them at all times. The first 5 stories recorded were times prior to Zelda arriving. They detail a celebration, the relationship between Sonia and Rauru, Minoru, and the eradication of the monsters shortly after the founding of Hyrule. If the Chamberlain thought a dance party was important enough to be permanently recorded into the history books, then certainly the Queen giving birth to the first ever half Hylian, half Stone-Eyed child would have made it into these chronicles. But the story isn't there. It's not there before Zelda's arrival, and we get confirmation it's not there after Zelda's arrival, as it isn't mentioned in the latter 7 chronicles either. And it's not mentioned because the child doesn't exist. The point here is that if Nintendo had intended on a child existing and carrying on Rauru and Sonia's kingdom, then they would have included it somewhere. And where better to include it than these stories of an ancient past whose sole intention is to develop the lore and characteristics of Sonia and Rauru. In the absence of this information, I think you'd have to conclude that they did not have a child. That being said, you can't really get around the fact that Sonia stated that she sensed a blood connection between herself and Zelda. I think we've covered enough evidence to say that Zelda calling Rauru and Sonia her ancestors, and Sonia claiming Zelda as a distant relative, were misinterpretations on their part. But Sonia sensing a blood connection is undeniable proof that they do indeed have blood ties. This is where the theory gets tied together, because we actually have a reason why Sonia and Zelda may share blood, without Zelda being a literal descendant of Sonia's. My theory is that the royal bloodline is actually the bloodline of the Goddess Hylia. Sure, there are parts of the family tree that are connected by children within the royal family. For example, Zelda from Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, is actually a distant relative of the Zelda we meet in Zelda 1. This was well before the lore of Skyward Sword was conceived. But to assume that every single royal family had exactly one daughter would, defy probability. There are such huge gaps in time between legends. I mean, this is a video game series after all. I think that with Skyward Sword, they gave us a reason as to why the different royal families are connected, and that reason is the blood of the Goddess Hylia, the blood that is cursed to a vicious cycle of hatred, just like the spirit of the hero. As we discussed, the cycle started over with each calamity. This is why Zelda carries the blood of the goddess. She is destined to do battle with the calamity. This is why Sonia can detect a blood connection. It's not simply that they are literal family, but rather, they both share the blood of the goddess. When Sonia tells Zelda they'll tell the people they are long-lost relatives, and that
It is true, after all.
this is Sonia's interpretation of why they share blood, as she isn't aware of Demise's curse like we the player are. I mean, she didn't know she was going to die in the very near future. She easily could have assumed that she was going to have a child. As for Zelda referring to the founders as ancestors at the beginning of the game, this is just another way to say the royal family before hers. As for Zelda sharing the same light power that Rauru has, that actually somewhat ties in with another theory that I have that I'm not really going to dig into the specifics here in this video. But the short of it is that Rauru shares the same power of the Triforce that Zelda has. Check out the card above for the video containing that theory. What I believe is that the blood of the goddess is imbued within the chosen royal female during a time when Ganondorf threatens Hyrule. Hylia is still clearly conscious during the era of the wild. We speak to her every time we talk to a goddess statue after collecting 4 spirit orbs and want a new heart piece or stamina vessel. She too was cursed by Demise all those years ago. It was her blood sworn to this vicious cycle of hatred. And so whenever Demise's hatred is born anew in the form of Ganondorf, her blood imbues the Hylian woman destined to do battle with it. In the ancient past, this is Sonia. However, this time she perishes at the hands of the Demon King. This is the other reason why Zelda was sent back in time. Yes, she needed to power the Master Sword for her chosen knight millennia into the future, but she also needed to face Ganondorf in the absence of Sonia. Remember, the spirit of the hero and the blood of the goddess are destined to do battle with the hatred incarnate. Zelda had to be present with Sonia out of the picture, because Zelda, just like Sonia, bore the blood of the goddess. So what do you think? Were the royal couple keeping a child in safekeeping during the events of the ancient past? Or have I convinced you that Hylia is the reason for all the family ties between the Hyrulean kingdom? I believe the lore Skyward Sword introduced is still highly prevalent, as it too was directed by the same series director that directed Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Hidemaru Fujibayashi. Oh, and remember how I said the spirit of the hero and the blood of the goddess were destined to do battle with the hatred incarnate, and only mentioned the blood of the goddess? Well, I actually have another theory I've uploaded here to YouTube, where I propose that Rauru has the spirit of the hero. You can check that out here in my Where's the Triforce video. I hope you enjoyed this theory either way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments so that we can continue the conversation, Chat Nation.